Hey gang, welcome back to another Pickled Dragon Unscripted. It's Matt, the Pickled Dragon here. Jacoya is not with us today. She's off in a new land somewhere far, far away, attending a wedding or something. So, after our last video where we discussed Rob Kuntz's response to WotC's egregious preface to their 50th anniversary book. We had a lot of comments and a lot of really good, insightful comments and questions, and some of them were on both sides of the argument. And I really appreciate when somebody doesn't rant, they don't flip out, they don't say unfounded things, but they try to carry on a conversation. And I think that's something that's sorely lacking today. So I wanted to highlight a few things and talk about why it is that we stand up for the old guard or the original game developers of Dungeons and Dragons when so many people attacked them for things that were said in the 70s and early 80s or written. So this was a question that came up, and this person's obviously on the other side of the fence from me, but we were talking back and forth, and I thought that their question deserved more conversation, and I guess they write, I guess one of the things I always wonder is why we are so quick to defend the old guard. I get that we don't have to tear them down, which people are obviously doing just that. But why isn't it okay to recognize mistakes? It's always okay to recognize mistakes, but that's not what's happening. In that preface, they talk about charitably ascribing their early game development to misinformation, and when you use the word charitably, it's clear that they are saying, it's a backhanded way of saying these people are terrible. And yeah, I mean, these people aren't even alive anymore to stand up for themselves. There's no thought whatsoever to changing times and changing ideals. So why do we stand up for them? Partially because they're not here anymore to defend themselves. Partially because there is so much misinformation going on around there, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that. And partially because it's personal. These games were very important to us growing up, and they really shaped who we are as people. And I've talked at length about how much gaming meant to me as somebody with a learning disability, and overcoming that disability through gaming. So anyway, let's get into it. And I really want to start out by saying, or quoting Mark Twain, who said something to the effect that a lie will make it halfway around the world before the truth even gets their shoes on. And what he's saying there is that people are much more willing to respond to, or are much more willing to comment on salacious and emotion-provoking material than they are the truth. The truth is oftentimes much more boring, but when you start getting into drama, everyone flips out, and that's what spurs people to it. So, before we go on, this is the post that a lot of people cite as Gary showing his misogynist colors, where he writes, "As a biological determinist, I am positive that most females do not play RPGs because of a difference in brain function. They can play as well as males. but they do not achieve the same sense of satisfaction for playing. Obviously, that's not universal. And he says most, right? And he doesn't say all. And coming from him, who in the 70s would go to gaming conventions, wargaming conventions, and there'd be 95% males there, or, TSR did their own demographic research and they found, hey, most of their consumers were males. I mailed in dozens of those little flyers that came in the Dragon magazines. There were all these surveys they were constantly taking. So I am sure that they knew who their demographic was, or at least they thought. Obviously today I've seen various numbers on females in gaming. Now, from my own experience, I actually went through all of my documents from past cons where you have all your sign-up sheets for all your games. Dozens of games I've run over the years. Still have all the sign-up sheets. And I would say about 10 to 15% of the people that attended my games were female. Now, that still is not as scientific as it could, because maybe I write adventures that just are more appealing to guys. Fair enough. I've seen the official statement, like if you Google what percentage of players are female, D&D players, it'll say 40%. I couldn't quite figure out where that number came from, but I have seen other surveys that ascribe it between 8 and 15%. So take the data for what you will. It's still, the fact is that it's still mostly guys who attend these games, whether you take the 40% number or not. And I think about like, my mother lived with us for a year, and she was active in all kinds of clubs, crocheting clubs and scrapbook clubs, and she had cats. Ugh, cats. I'm not a cat fan, but that's okay. I know a lot of people are. But cat clubs even. And there was not a single guy in any of those clubs. Now, does that mean that they're just not allowing guys to play? Are they gatekeeping? Probably not. It's just men and women are wired differently. We get satisfaction from different things. And he's arguing the whole biological determinist thing. And 10, 20 years ago, the nature-nurture debate was still going on. And I think most people could agree that it's a little of both. But I at the time that he wrote this, 20 years ago, he thought that people were ingrained. You were born, your genetic makeup makes you predisposed to enjoy games, makes you predisposed to enjoy scrapbooking, make you we are wired differently. That's all he's saying. If you think that's sexist, well, I would love to hear in the comments why you think it's sexist. And before you say, well, you're just a guy, you don't understand, we are going to revisit this topic later with Dracoya and a panel of all ladies, and we're going to discuss this. So, but before we go on, I want to get back to the Mark Twain quote, about the lie. So, in today's world where people are consuming fragments of information and where people read headlines rather than do their own research and find out what was actually said. Here, this person, quote unquote, women can't enjoy games because of their tiny brains, Gary Gygax. So when you put it, there's going to be plenty of people who just read the headline and just don't go any further. They just don't. And they're going to have that, and they're going to have that negative connotation of Gary Gygax. And whether they even remember the quote or not, they're going to move on through life with this negative impression of Gary Gygax, and that is what they're going to carry forward. And that obviously isn't even the truth. He never said any of that. You know, he says they can play just as well. They can play just as well. You know, and here's another comment from our discussion yesterday. He was worse than they made him out to be. I'm from Wisconsin, and I used to play at one of the stores he ran games at. I heard from people that in the old days, he would exclude women from his games and would often make pretty disparaging remarks or comments. So first off, if he was at the game store, why did he need to hear from other people? And if it was just pretty often, I mean, there's so much wrong with this statement. And this gets back to where did this information come from? Why does this person feel the need to tear him down without any kind of evidence, without any kind of corroboration? Because he's saying he heard it from other people, right? And yeah, I mean, it's kind of dirty in the end. It's kind of dirty. But I'm going to leave it with a video from my friend Kelsey Dionne. And again, this is going to be anecdotal, but I want you guys to hear her encounter with Gary Gygax and tell me if you think those are the actions of a misogynist who wants to keep women out of gaming.
And I went to Gen Con, and it falls over my birthday. So what my game master, my dungeon master, is this wonderful writer who was like the head editor of Scry magazine. And we had no idea like how influential he was in the industry. He had worked with Gary. He had been writing adventures forever. He like knew everybody at Judges Guild. And he was running games for us every week. And so he was at Gen Con as well. He kind of like showed up and recognized our whole gaming crew. We all kind of met up there and were hanging out. And he was like, Kelsey, I pulled some strings and I figured something out really special for you for your birthday. And I was like, oh, what is it? And he's like, I want you to come with me. And so me and a couple friends went out like in the smoking patio. And Gary Gygax was sitting there and he was like, hey, happy birthday. I heard it's your birthday. And third edition had just come out. And so like my friends had sneaked off with my Dungeon Master's Guide and got him to sign it for me. And Gary gave me some dice for my birthday. And he hung out with us for like, you know, a bit, honestly. And it was like a walled off, like an isolated area. So we got to hang out with him for a little while. And he was just chatting with us. And he told me that I should become a dungeon master and that I should have no mercy on my players and quote, slap them around like redheaded dwarves. So
dwarves.
Yep. And I will never forget that. And like, he was honestly, I mean, I was this like gorky 12-year-old girl and he was so encouraging and treated me like a grandkid. Like he seemed genuinely excited for me that I wanted to be a dungeon master and run D&D. And he was so encouraging. And so I think it's fun and special to tell that story because I don't know if people always had been aware of that side of him. And I mean, firsthand experience, like, you know, I was so lucky to get to have encouragement directly from him about me jumping into D&D. And I will always remember that, you know?
Yeah, so again, does that sound like a gatekeeper? I don't think it's right what they did what they wrote in that preface. And I don't think it's necessarily right that they get such a bad rap. But we're going to talk about that more in a future video, probably a couple weeks. It's going to take us to get the folks together to discuss. But I sure hope you check it out. But in the meantime, like, comment, subscribe. And come on back. Have another round on us. Hopefully I'll have my scotch back by then.